Welcome back to another episode of Watch Thomas Pretend He Knows What He's Doing. Today I'm going to be talking about how I added life into my procedural island generation game. I've added sheep, birds, fish, boats, so let's dive into it. First up, we have some little swimmers. I added a few different fish types as well as this cute little squid into the game. And these models came from the Quirky Animals asset pack. I already owned these assets, so I'm using them now to save some time. I might create my own models in Blender in the future, but for now I think they look pretty good. Now for adding fish into the game, I had to figure out exactly what that functionality would look like. And this is what I came up with. We'll need to determine where the fish spawn. We need to decide what kind of fish spawn. We'll need to decide where they move, how fast they move, how they'll be animated, how they turn, and how they interact with each other and blocks of land. So let's tackle these one by one. For spawning, that was easy enough. I just gave it some world coordinates that determine the space that a fish is allowed to be spawned in. Then I randomly choose a point in there and spawn the fish. But if there's anything that I've learned while working in this project, it's that pure randomness looks pretty bad. So instead, I want to cluster the fish into pods or schools. So I added a field to decide how big the pod sizes should be. Maybe 5 fish grouped together. And, of course, how many fish we want to spawn in total. Okay, let's try it out. Yeah, it's looking pretty good. Okay, now let's give the fish some movement. I wrote a simple script called Swimmer that will move the fish forward according to their speed. Then after a given amount of time, they will turn directions. And this is what it looks like. And you can see that it makes it easy to give different fish a unique set of movement constraints. So maybe the squid can be fast, and I can make bigger fish slower and turn more slowly. And things are looking pretty good there. Now, let's consider our options for how to animate these fish. These specific fish models came pre-packaged into prefabs with attached animator components on them. So you might think, oh, just set them up in the swim state in the animator and boom, we're done. But we can't really do that. Because having animators running is expensive, and if we have dozens or hundreds of fish in the scene, it would bog things down considerably. So instead, I took one specific animation clip and now play it with the legacy animator component, which has much less overhead. Now at this point things are looking pretty good, but the last thing that we need to decide for the fish is how do we want them to interact with one another, and how do we want them to interact with plots of land. I considered implementing a Boyd's algorithm that would allow the fish to flock together, and then I could add colliders to the fish and use raycasts to detect if they are about to run into land, but then I remembered my main slogan for game development. If it ain't broken, then there's no need to be overcomplicated with things that run just as good as they are. TM. So that's it. They can run through each other and through solid walls, and they're dumb as rocks, but it looks pretty good. Okay, now let's move on to the animals that I'm most excited about. Birds. But let me tell you why. If you pay attention to any gorgeous landscape, a painting or a scene in a movie or whatever, if there are little white birds flying around, it immediately gives you a sense of scale for what you're looking at, and it makes the whole image fill with much more grandeur. So that's what I want. Little white birds. Let's do it. So the process is similar to the fish, but the behavior is obviously different. So let's list it out. What do they look like? Where do birds spawn? What height do they fly at? How do they move? How do they animate? How do I keep them on the screen? And how do I make them not identical? Okay, so we need to figure out how we want the birds to look. I have these quirky animal assets, but the birds are not what I was imagining. So I could model my own basic bird, but I think I'll save some time and just override this bird's material and then squash him into a simpler looking bird. Now there are a million things wrong with what I'm doing this way, but guess what? I'm my own boss, so I can make the birds however I want. Beautiful. Okay, so where do the birds spawn? Easy, same as the fish, except that I want them to be at different heights. So let's add a min and max value for the height where the flocks of birds can spawn. And how they move should be different than the fish as well. They should fly straight longer and make more gradual turns. Easy enough. And the animation is also pretty straightforward. The only thing that I want to account for is that I don't want them flapping endlessly. They should glide and then flap a bit and then glide again. But one thing I need to account for is that I don't want them to fly off the screen where we'll never see them again. So I'm going to put a check in the bird script that will check if the birds have gone too far away from the center of the island. And if they get too far, they'll be turned around and head back toward the center. Now one problem that cropped up as I was doing this is that all of the birds looked too similar. They were completely identical. To remedy this, I made a random offset for when to start their animation. Then I made a randomized spawn offset so the flocks would spawn in groups, but loosely a certain distance from each other. And then finally I programmed a minimum and maximum to randomly scale the size of the birds so they are all a slightly different size. And man, this is having the exact effect I was hoping to achieve. Watching these birds fly around brings so much scale and a sense of vibrancy to the scene. I'm very, very happy with it. Okay, so we've done the sea, we've done the sky, so what's left? Oh yeah, the stuff that goes on the land. And I want to add more animal types in the future, but I think the behavior will be mostly the same, so we're just going to start with the basics. Sheep. Now, fish and birds were relatively easy, but sheep will be more difficult because they can't go wherever they want. I don't want them walking off the land and into the water, and I don't want them to walk through houses or walls. So let's see what we need to figure out. We need to figure out where to spawn them, what to spawn, how many to spawn, how to figure out their movement with constraints, and set up a wander radius for them. Okay, so for where to spawn them, it's going to be different than fish or birds. Instead of using a randomized world position, I'm instead taking a list of my spawned tile blocks and then choosing some of those randomly. But before I know if I can actually use that tile, I have to shoot a raycast down at it. And if it hits the tile block, then I know I can spawn my sheep there because nothing else is existing in that space. But if it hits anything else, like a house or a tree, then I have to choose a different tile. Then we have to figure out what type of animal we want to spawn. Right now I have a sheep and a bighorn model that I want to use, but I wanted it to be a weighted random. So I added a little slider here that will increase or decrease the likelihood of a particular animal spawning in. And then of course there's how many to spawn, so I set a herd size to somewhere under 3. And then we move on to the movement. Get it? Move on to the movement. Cool. Like and subscribe. So for the sheep movement, I set a wander radius. So every few seconds, the sheep will pick a random location that is within a certain radius of its spawn position. Then we do the same trick where we shoot a raycast down at a particular position to see if it's available. Then if we don't hit a house or a tree or the water or whatever, then that will be the new target position that the sheep will move to. And I'm not doing collision detection right now. I'm basically just having sheep avoid walking through walls by constraining the wander radius of the sheep to stay within the same tile that it spawned onto. It would be nice if animals could actually traverse across the island, but that's a feature for a later date. And then on top of adding these animals, here's a couple of other features that I've been working on in conjunction. One was adding a particle effect when building land blocks. It feels really good now, since the little dirt particles fly around and bounce off of things. The implementation had a rough start, but eventually I was able to dial it in, and it feels really good now. And one critical optimization technique I put in was limiting the amount of work I was doing behind the scenes when I had the build tool or the structure placement tool active. Now the logic for placing structures or blocks only runs if you move the mouse, so it's no longer destroying and recreating the white preview object each and every frame. So that's all she wrote, and by she, I mean me, I guess. If you want to try out the game, I've linked the Steam page below in the description. I'm debating on whether I want to post a demo on Steam or if I just want to take that time and energy and focus on putting more features into the game. I don't know, we'll see. A friend of mine recently told me that for 2024, he thinks I should spend less energy on the quality of videos that I put out and more on the quantity because he wants to see more steady updates of what I'm working on. I don't know, you tell me if you agree or disagree. I think it would be kind of fun to just put together some really sloppy edited videos, but just keep you guys more up to date with the day-to-day improvements that I'm making with the game. Let me know if that sounds interesting to you, because I'd like to upload more frequently in 2024. Last year, in 2023, I uploaded 17 videos, which isn't bad, but I would like to at least double that. But just like everything else, when it comes to being a solo indie game developer, the hardest part is trying to figure out where I should put my energy, because I could spend weeks and weeks making YouTube videos, coding, or I could be trying to do marketing or making graphical assets or design of the game. It's a lot of pick and choose my battles. So I'm trying to figure out how much YouTube do I want to do versus how much game development do I want to do. Anyways, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. Consider giving the video a thumbs up if you thought it was good. Also consider subscribing. Also consider wishlisting Bridges and Docks. And I'll see you all very soon in the next video.